In 100 rounds, if you beat me, you can see the dean. If you can't, you can leave. The clear voice of Shui Miao echoed on the square, and his mind moved. The surging fighting chi in the cyclone in his body surged out of time. While its breath changed, the source gas between heaven and earth surged up, turned into a storm and lingered around Shui Miao. The appearance of this scene made the faces of all the students and tutors present shocked. Even the elders in the attic in the distance couldn't help feeling a burst of surprise. Half-step Huayuanjing, this boy seems to be a little stronger than we expected. Looking at his breath, I believe he will be able to make a formal breakthrough in less than half a year. In just 10 years, he will be promoted from 1.5 emperors to Huayuanjing. I'm afraid this boy will become the first person in our hospital in 100 years. All the elders were amazed. Shui Miao's talent was really beyond ordinary people. No wonder even the dean would favor him. Half-step source environment. In a whisper, Xiao Yan was also shocked by the strength of Shui Miao. Since he walked on the mainland, Shui Miao in front of him can be said to be the first of all the young generation he had seen. They are of the same age, but the latter's cultivation has reached such a point that he can't underestimate this alone. I will see him. But in a moment, Xiao Yang had already recovered his mind. He smiled and stepped on the ground with the soles of his feet. The fighting spirit in the cyclone in his body suddenly swept out at this moment. Buzz! 2 strong smells collided on the square, and then turned into a storm and dissipated together. Almost at the same time, the sight of everyone on the square suddenly shifted from Shui Miao to Xiao Yang. There were stunned expressions on each face, and I felt a burst of disbelief in my heart. This guy is only the 7-star dude? I thought he had no accomplishments. In the end, he was just a 7-star fighting emperor. Even among us, many people were enough to crush him. Unexpectedly, they dared to compete with Shui Miao Sr. with a confident look. This goods is too arrogant. Hey, for such a person who likes to support the university, we should give him enough lessons. Let Senior Shui Miao educate him today, ha ha. All the students around looked at Xiao Yang, who showed his strength on the square with sarcastic faces. His words were full of sneers and sarcasm. Even some tutors and deacons couldn't help but cast lost eyes on him. At this age, there are very few students who can improve their cultivation to the 7-star fighting emperor, which proves Xiao Yang's talent to them. However, Xiao Yang's arrogance may become a big obstacle to his growth. Of course, not everyone thinks so. At this time, Liu Xian stared at Xiao Yang with a shocked face, and felt incredible in her heart. She once saw Xiao Yang crush the 5 strong fighting emperors easily with her own strength. Although the strongest of the 5 is only the 6-star fighting emperor, if such a team is ordinary, it cannot be easily solved by a 7-star fighting emperor. But looking back at Xiao Yang, Liu Xian still remembered what had happened a few days ago. Even if all the tutors and students present thought Xiao Yang was just a 7-star fighting emperor, she would never think so. Before you see the result of things, you can't make a comment, and you can't underestimate anyone because of the appearance. The result of that will only bring you an unbearable blow. Therefore, when all the people present sneered at Xiao Yang because of his breath, Shui Miao and the elders in the attic were very careful to stare at Xiao Yang. Then the next moment, the formal fight immediately open. Drink. The 2 people in the center of the square burst out a violent drink, and the action was completely consistent. They stepped on the ground, and the terrible force poured out corresponding to the time. The square sank directly between the violent shaking, and the 2 people's bodies also shot forward like lightning. Boom. The 2 men's body shape was instantly fixed in the middle of the square when they hit each other. The terrible energy storm swept through the square in a short time, and the whole square was destroyed in an instant. In the middle of the square, Xiao Yang and Shui Miao met with each other's eyes, and their faces were all with arrogant and uninhibited smiles. They are also the most promising young generation. They only meet for the first time, but they are incompatible. One punch fell, the soles of Shui Miao's feet retreated half a step, and his right fist was clenched. The surging fighting spirit of water attributes immediately poured out of the body, covering the whole arm. Then, one punch was blasted out to Xiao Yang again. Xiao Yang was unwilling to show weakness. While holding his right fist tightly, Sen's white flame wrapped the whole arm. The terrible high temperature immediately increased the temperature between heaven and earth. Strange fire. Shuremiao's pupil shrank slightly and his heart was surprised. Boom. Then, the fierce collision happened again, and the energy wave formed by fire and water immediately centered on these two people and swept away on both sides. Suddenly, the teachers around the square couldn't help but change their faces and quickly stepped forward, just like a real gas mask. They rose up in time and blocked it at the moment when the energy wave swept in. However, even so, the solid gas mask also trembled uncontrollably. Feeling the terrible breath coming from the light mask, all the students present couldn't help turning a little white. If they hadn't been resisted by their tutors, I'm afraid they would have fallen down at this time. In the collision just now, Xiao Yang and Shui Miao are equal. The dispute between fire and water has never seen the result after all, which also makes them understand that Xiao Yang is not as simple as it seems. However, in the twinkling of an eye, those students who were still boasting that they could easily defeat Xiao Yang now withdrew bitterly, and Xiao Yang and Shui Miao in the middle of the square also shook their bodies and poured out their fighting spirit, and they retreated back. You are really not as simple as it seems. I'm flattered. You're not bad. Xiao Yang lightly shook his palm and said with a grin. Don't be happy too early. This is only the first round. Come again. Shui Miao also smiled coldly. He shook his 5 fingers in his right hand, and his fighting spirit surged up to remove the numbness. The fighting spirit surged up, and the blue water quickly condensed on the surface of Shui Miao and turned into a pair of armor condensed by water. With the condensation of armor, the ground around Shui Miao's body was also covered by water. Even the air that had become dry because of Xiao Yang's strange fire a moment ago became moist again. Just the overflow of fighting spirit can lead to changes in heaven and earth. Shui Miao's name as the first person in Beihai University is not blown out. With the cohesion of the armor, Shui Miao immediately turned his hand, and the light of the ring between his fingers flashed. Soon, an ink-long gun appeared in his hand. All of a sudden, the bitter smell of felling spread from it, but from this smell, we can imagine how much blood this long gun had been stained with. Let me see how you will defeat me in 100 round. Whale gun, angry whale tsunami. Shui Miao's face was cold, his eyes were cold, his wrist twisted, his long gun rotated, the tip of the gun fell to the ground, stabbed into the water around his body, and then swept away fiercely. The water spray aroused and condensed rapidly in the middle of the air. In the twinkling of an eye, it turned into a huge wave and blocked Shui Miao's face. The latter stomped on the ground, and his body immediately rose up, and immediately fell on the top of the huge wave. The cold gun tip crossed the water again, and the waves immediately rushed at Xiao Yang. Don't you have to hide? After looking at the huge waves that had covered more than half of the square in the twinkling of an eye, Xiao Yang's eyes twinkled slightly, felt the surging breath from it, and was awed in his heart. When the mind moved, the magnificent fighting spirit in the body suddenly burst out. With a backhand grip, the black ruler immediately fell into his hand. With a hard stroke of his left hand on the ruler, the raging forest white flame immediately climbed up the giant ruler, and the blazing high temperature also spread. 7 broken sky feet, 1 foot. With 1 foot waving, Xiao Yang's standing body suddenly twisted. Without hesitation, he turned back and waved 2 feet. The 3 magnificent feet seemed to separate heaven and earth. In a twinkling, they were all integrated together. Outside the square, countless students looked at the scene in front of them, and the blood in their bodies was hot. The competition between water and fire is a battle of old enemies. After the previous confrontation, the people present knew very well that if the cultivation accomplishments of the 2 people in the field were compared, it would be a tie. Now they can only compare their own combat experience and combat skills. In such a battle, rich combat experience and strong fighting skills will undoubtedly become the key to victory or defeat. When the towering waves across the square collided with the magnificent ruler standing between heaven and earth, the whole square was quiet for a moment. Everyone held their breath and stared at the center of the square, waiting for the next second. Boom. Then, the 2 lights of blue and white crisscrossed each other and filled the whole square. For a moment, The sight of all the students outside the battlefield was blocked. Only a deafening explosion sounded, and everyone's sight became extremely blurred. Only those mentors and all parties in charge could see the war situation. The terrible energy storm severely impacted the energy cover around the square. The whole square was shaking violently. Everything in the battle circle had been destroyed. When the dazzling light gradually faded, there was a fierce sound of metal and iron collision in the battle circle. Everyone followed the prestige and saw that inside the battle circle at this time, Xiao Yan and Shui Miao were waving their weapons, and there was a fierce collision between you and me. In the void, Shui Miao held a long gun and showed his shooting skills. The sharp spear point stabbed Xiao Yang's vital points like a poisonous snake. The gun tip easily tore the void, with a harsh sonic boom, quickly approaching Xiao Yang's throat. In the face of Shui Miao's lightning attack, Xiao Yang showed no weakness. Although the dark heavy ruler in his hand was relatively large, in Xiao Yang's hand, it was no slower to wave than the long gun in Shui Miao's hand. Seeing the tip of the gun in front of him, Xiao Yang waved the huge ruler in his hand and immediately blocked him in front of him in a burst of sparks, stopped the long gun. Ding! However, then, the gun front had strangely come to Xiao Yang's knee. The gun front was sharp and swept hard, but it was next to Xiao Yang's knee. Although he escaped the gun tip, Xiao Yang's trouser legs were easily torn apart by the sharp fighting spirit contained in the gun front, and even left a thin blood mark on the skin under it. Fortunately, with the slightest coolness from his knees, Xiao Yang's giant ruler suddenly swept across and hit Shui Miao's head. The latter sneered, and as soon as the gun was lifted, he wanted to block Xiao Yang's blow. Dang! At the moment when the giant ruler collided with the gun body, the terrible force suddenly poured out, and Shui Miao's face suddenly changed at this moment. He never expected that Xiao Yang's blow would contain such terrible strength. Under the action of that terrible force, the long gun bent rapidly, and the whole gun body was forcibly smashed into an extremely strange dangerous arc. The two rubbed and sparks burst out until Xiao Yang pulled back his huge ruler. Shui Miao's body withdrew a few steps uncontrollably, but the long gun in his hand was still shaking violently, making his hands holding the long gun numb rapidly. Even the tiger's mouth was cracked, and blood immediately emerged. This time, Shui Miao suffered a small loss. For most of the reasons, he can only blame him for belittling his opponent and the power contained under Xiao Yang's body. The 30th round, come again, wail gun, wail Jiaoxian. In his heart, Shui Miao didn't dare to underestimate Xiao Yang anymore. His palm scratched hard over the gun body, and the shaking gun body immediately calmed down. Then, his mind moved, and the fighting spirit on the long gun emerged. In the twinkling of an eye, he turned into a fierce beast, wrapped the gun body and hid it. He swept it out with the long gun and drew an extremely strange arc in the air, lightning close to Xiao Yang's throat. Feeling the terrible smell from the fierce beast, Xiao Yang also sank his face and felt dignified in his heart. Holding the giant ruler in his hand, the vast soul power immediately poured out from the center of his eyebrows. In an instant, he saw through the killing move hidden under the fierce beast. While his body retreated, the mysterious heavy ruler in his hand was raised, and the flame surged up and cut a track in front of him from top to bottom. When the giant foot fell, the fierce force tore the virtual shadow of the fierce beast, and then it collided with the seemingly invisible gun tip under it. The virtual image of the fierce beast broke in an instant, but it was empty. People outside the field were worried for a while when they saw it. If Xiao Yang's blow failed, the price would be hard to bear. However, at the next moment, under the broad and strong ruler front of Shenchong ruler, a gun tip with cold light suddenly appeared, and then collided with Shenchong ruler. When a foot fell, the heavy foot edge collided violently on the gun tip, and the powerful force gushed out in time. The forest white flame spread rapidly from the huge foot and climbed up the cold gun tip, but almost at the same time, the fighting spirit of the vast water system also rushed to the face, rushed into the flame without hesitation and competed with each other. However, in addition to these, under the blessing of Xiao Yang's strength, the heavy giant foot bent the long gun. Shui Miao, who shot first, was blocked back by Xiao Yang's heavy foot, and even seemed a little embarrassed. Such a hidden attack was unexpectedly noticed by Xiao Yang. Shui Miao's eyes couldn't help being surprised, But before he could think more, the terrible strength had spread with the gun. Damn, this guy has terrible physical strength. The terrible power came again from the gun body. Shiremiao's 2 arms were shaking uncontrollably, his teeth clenched, and his face changed. At the same time, the more surging fighting spirit swept outward. Even the source gas between the surrounding heaven and earth moved with it, and rushed along the gun body towards the raging forest white flame and the mysterious heavy ruler. At this moment, Shiremiao, as a powerful force in the half-step source environment, was revealed. Under the vast package of fighting spirit, the trembling body of the gun immediately stabilized. Immediately, a cold hum was heard, and the palm of the hand was severely patted on the long gun. The long gun, which had just recovered its straightness, immediately bent again. The long gun suddenly approached forward under the package of fighting spirit, and the falling heavy ruler was also bounced up. Loosen it. When the giant ruler was shot up by the long gun, Shiremiao suddenly gave a violent drink in his mouth. He suddenly held the long gun with both hands and shook with force. The gun tip at the front suddenly swayed at a high speed and collided fiercely on the giant ruler, making the mysterious heavy ruler swing uncontrollably. Then the gun tip twisted strangely. When the sparks burst, his strength burst out and took advantage of it. From bottom to top, he picked out the Xian heavy ruler in Xiao Yang's hand. Admit defeat. With one blow, the weapon in Xiao Yang's hand flew away. Shiremiao's face suddenly became fierce. He took back his long gun and rushed forward suddenly. However, in the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Xiao Yang. He held the gun in his right hand and turned his left hand into a claw. He tore it off against Xiao Yang's chest. However, in the face of Shiremiao's many fierce attacks, Xiao Yang did not shrink back at all. He let Shiremiao's fierce claws rush, his hands suddenly clenched into fists, and his strength was mobilized at this moment. Stab. Just for a moment, the black robe on Xiao Yang's body surface was easily torn. Then, the fierce claws fell on Xiao Yang's chest. Dang dang. The clothes and robes were broken, and Shiremiao's claws fell on Xiao Yang's chest. However, a crisp sound of gold and iron collision sounded. When the people present and Shiremiao were looking at it, the scene that appeared at the moment stunned everyone. At the moment, Xiao Yang's body has been covered by a layer of purple and gold scales. Shiremiao's shot down on Xiao Yang's chest, but it was resisted by it. What? As soon as the pupil shrinks suddenly, Shiremiao suddenly feels bad. The soles of his feet stamp the void heavily, and his body immediately bursts out backward. Force image resolution. But then, at the same time, Xiao Yang suddenly followed up, raised his right fist, which could be called a terrible powerful force, quickly condensed in the palm of his hand, fell, and blasted away at Shiremiao's chest. Facing Xiao Yang's fist, Shiremiao dare not be careless. He doesn't have the strange armor of the former. Once he is hit with such a fist, he is afraid to lose his combat power in an instant. At the critical moment, the long gun held in Shiremiao's right hand was immediately blocked in front of him. The surging fighting spirit in his body also rushed out and poured into the long gun without reservation to resist Xiao Yang's punch. Dang! When the fist fell, the world suddenly hummed. Everyone's eardrums couldn't help a violent tremor. Xiao Yang's fist fell on the long gun, and the terrible power burst out in an instant. At the moment, the meat and bone fist is stronger than the long gun made of this special material. At the moment of contact, the hard body of the long gun with fighting spirit was still irresistibly bent rapidly until it was close to Shiremiao's chest. The latter's throat couldn't help but give a stuffy hum. Bang! That is, at this moment, the clothes Shiremiao was wearing burst suddenly, and his whole body suddenly lost control and landed rapidly towards the ground below. People have not landed yet, but the terrible force has blasted the dilapidated square below out of a huge pit, and Shiremiao's body has been smashed into it and buried deeply. On the periphery of the square, everyone was shocked and looked at the scene in the field. They really couldn't believe their eyes. Before half of the 100 rounds, Shiremiao, the first person of Beihai College, had lost. Moreover, he was defeated by a 7-star fighting emperor. No one will believe it even if it is said to anyone. The square was silent, and the teachers frowned one after another. Looking at the huge dust-filled pit in the middle of the battle circle, Their hearts were also surprised. The sudden appearance of Xiao Yang has brought too many surprises to them in this short video. In the attic, the elders of the college are also surprised to look at Xiao Yang over the square at the moment. Only Haimo Dust and the old man in black robe who are high at this time are interested in staring at Xiao Yang below. The former is fine, but the latter is the nature of the latter when they see the purple and golden scales on Xiao Yang's body surface, but I couldn't help but change my face. Who is this boy? How could he have something of the Taishu ancient dragon family, dragon scale armor? No, it doesn't seem to be. I've seen dragon scale armor. Although it's not vulgar, it's far less than this one on him. This boy seems to have a lot of secrets. The old man in black robe, who was indifferent to many things, was curious about Xiao Yang because of these things. It was also at this time that in the square below, in the huge pit, the deep voice of words came out. I have to say, I really underestimated you before. I didn't expect your physical strength to be so strong. Next, I should take out some real things. With the sound of words, a thick fog suddenly filled the air in the battle circle surrounded by the teacher's ability. At the same time, the water meow with bare upper body also flew up again. Every time the soles of the feet tread on the void, there will be a small pool of water stains on the soles of the feet. With his body shape, he came to Xiao Yang again and around him, 9 water curtains were condensed. Is this the avenue of water? Looking at the 9 water curtains condensed around Shuremiao's body, Xiao Yang couldn't help whispering and smiling with interest. The power of the road, yes, the senior student Shuremiao also has the power of the road. When the senior student was the 5-star fighting emperor, it was said that he understood the power of the road. Now when he saw it, it was actually the water road with the same attributes as him. The senior student had let the boy before. Now he sacrificed the power of the road. Xiao Yang was doomed. On the square, when a group of students saw the 9 water curtains condensed around Shuremiao, their faces immediately showed a fanatical look. Although Xiao Yang's strength was quite good, it was only part of it. In front of the power of the road, all the advantages of Xiao Yang would be greatly reduced. As the most abstruse power between heaven and earth, few people can understand it in the world, but the power of those who can understand the power of the road is by no means ordinary and comparable to the strong at the same level. Even though Xiao Yang's combat power is extraordinary, it is difficult to give full play to his usual detached combat power in front of the power of the road. Hiss. 9 ways. I remember that the boy only understood 6 ways a few years ago. Now he has successfully condensed 9 ways. It seems that not only his behavior has improved in recent years, but also his power of the road has not fallen at all. It's really worthy of being regarded by the president. When this little guy grows up, he must be another giant in the future. Hey, but I'm curious. What's the power of Xiao Yang's avenue? Just when the elders were amazed at the water, the elder who first noticed Xiao Yang earlier smiled again. He always felt that Xiao Yang seemed to be a little unusual. Hearing the speech, several other elders around him also looked at Xiao Yang curiously, but then shook their heads. Although they didn't know what kind of power Xiao Yang mastered, after all, the latter's cultivation is still low, and the time to understand the power of the road must not be long. At the moment, Shuremiao has offered the power of the road. Then I think Xiao Yang is about to lose. At the same time, the water meow in front of Xiao Yang also moved again. While everyone around was talking, Shuremiao suddenly inserted his right hand into a water curtain beside him, and then pulled it violently, and the whole water curtain was deformed and twisted. When he pulled it in front of him, Shuremiao drew his hands from it, and the water curtain immediately contracted and lengthened. In a twinkling of an eye, it turned into a long gun completely condensed by the power of the road. This is avenue condensation. The road condenses. At the moment when Shuremiao's long gun solidified in his hand, a cry of surprise suddenly sounded in the attic in the distance. A group of elders even couldn't believe their eyes. The road solidified. This requires a special understanding of the power of the road before they can transform it. I think at the beginning, when they realized the solidification of the road, however, they have suffered a lot and spent a lot of time. Now, however, Shuremiao's action shocked them. Ordinary people know that the power of the avenue is particularly difficult to understand, but they don't know how great the difficulties will be if they want to drive it like an arm, even if they understand the power of the avenue. And the condensation of the avenue is another biggest obstacle after understanding the power of the avenue. This boy. His growth rate is far more terrible than we expected. In the attic, several elders took a deep breath and said slowly with shocked faces, "Hey, that's good. 3 years and 3 water curtains. This little guy is very good, but there's still some gap compared with Xiao Yan." On the top of the cloud, the man in black smiled and looked at the water meow, showing the power of the road below. Hey smiled, but there was a bit of banter in his eyes. Haimo Dust on one side shrugged helplessly. "Xiao Yang, I can feel that you also have the breath of the power of the road. Come on, let's win and lose with the power of the road." The clear and loud cheers swirled between the heaven and earth. The surrounding students heard Shuremiao's words, and their faces changed. They didn't expect that even Xiao Yang also mastered the power of the road. "Since you kindly invited me, I'll try my best." With a smile, Xiao Yang's heart moved. The invisible emptiness around him suddenly twisted, and then burst with a bang. Dark mysterious energy poured out from the dark shadow, and intertwined and condensed around Xiao Yang's body, turning into one tent after another. At the moment when Shuremiao and the college elders saw the strange energy, the expression on these faces could not help changing. They stared at the painted black tent around Xiao Yang with unbelievable eyes. The shock in their hearts was particularly huge. Hiss. This is Void. Void Avenue. Xiao Yang. He actually understood the avenue of emptiness. It's really shocking. When those elders recognized the avenue that Xiao Yang had mastered, everyone was filled with infinite horror. They really couldn't imagine that Xiao Yang could understand the avenue of emptiness. If the avenue revealed by Shuremiao is enough to make them marvel at it, then at this time, the empty avenue they see can frighten them. The Void Avenue, however, is among the best in all the powers of the avenue. Its particularity is almost against the sky. In the historical development of the whole continent, anyone who can master the Void Avenue is an extremely strong existence, and even has stood in the ranks of the top pyramids of the whole continent. From this alone, we can imagine what a terrible existence the Void Avenue is. However, the horror Xiao Yang brought to them is far from over. When all the people present watched with their own eyes as the tents gathered around Xiao Yang, the expression on their faces became more and more exaggerated. Even the college elders were stunned. 7, 8, 9, 10. The whole 10 tabernacles, Xiao Yang has surpassed Shuremiao only in the amount of the power of the road. At this moment, everyone's faces were capitalized with 4 unbelievable words. Standing opposite Xiao Yang, Shuremiao, a handsome face, looked extremely dignified. The more he contacts the people in front of him, the more he can feel the horror of each other. Looking at the whole continent, there are not many young people who can let him treat him like this. However, now, Xiao Yang, who doesn't know his source, is bound to join this ranks. Even, compared with those guys, Xiao Yang makes him feel more dangerous. Xiao Yang. Surnamed Xiao. Is it? But it's also wrong. I know those guys in their family very well. There has been no such person in recent years. Who is he? Staring at Xiao Yang in front of him, a suspicious mood suddenly appeared in the depths of Shuremiao's pupils. Xiao Yang suddenly thought of a family on the mainland, but after some thinking in his heart, he still gave up the idea. With his self-confidence, the family cannot cultivate such outstanding figures now, and Xiao Yang also said that he is an old disciple of Haimo Dust. He doesn't think that Haimo Dust will have any connection with that family. Moreover, if Xiao Yang really comes from that family, he can't not recognize himself, but from Xiao Yang's series of actions, the latter doesn't seem to know him, and what he knows is only limited to the name of Shuremiao. Who? Taking back his mind, Shuremiao breathed a long breath with trembling breath and tried his best to calm his heart. Only after a long time did he lift the long gun in his hand, face Xiao Yang and say in a dark tone, "Come again." This video will end here.